Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest new album Spotlight. This is the show where I put the spotlight on a new progressive album that I think you guys will really enjoy if you like a lot of the same music that I do. I'm actually doing 2 spotlights this week just because there's been so much fantastic music coming out and I feel like I've got to get to it somehow, so I'm going to squeeze a couple reviews into 1 week. But I think it's well worth it because we've got another really great, impressive album that I definitely want to talk about that's been on my mind for several weeks now and I think deserves its own spotlight episode. So it was part of my 30 albums of the beginning part of the year episode that I did a few weeks back where I talked about 30 album recommendations from the first half of 2023. So I mentioned it briefly there, but I wanted to give it its own standalone episode and talk about it and dive a little bit deeper because I think it's worthy of that and could very well end up in the top part of my year-end list, so I want you all to know about it. So this is the Anchorets. It all began with loneliness. The Anchoret is the brainchild of Canadian bass player Edward Levitsky, who always had the idea to bridge prog rock and his love of metal. He brought aboard a bunch of interesting musicians, including vocalist Sylvain Auclair of the progressive metal band Heaven's Cry and progressive rock band Carcass. So definitely an established figure there, and brings a bunch of other interesting musicians also, such as Andy Tillison on keyboards. So it's a really interesting smattering of different musicians from different parts of the world, and they play a blend of prog metal and prog rock that's really interesting to listen to. To me, it sounds a lot like Opeth at times, but it's maybe this is a simplified way to talk about it, but to me it's like Opeth for people that don't really care for the more aggressive growling vocals that are a part of Opeth. But it has that classic Opeth sound and style, that heaviness, but it doesn't really delve into the screaming death metal growls that a lot of us, including me, get a little bit put off by. So for me this is perfect because I've always been one of those that's like, I love Opeth, I love all the music that they're doing, they have so many cool different things going on musically, but I just can't get into the vocals. It's just too hard to get into that growling Cookie Monster type style. Well, this is the band that really creates that thing I've been seeking of, an Opeth style band that really has that cool, intricate, dark, progressive metal, but has more of a clean singer, more of a vocalist who has more melodic sounds than the heavy growling that you hear on the Opeth records. And don't get me wrong, I've ended up loving Opeth in all their iterations, and I love Michael Ackerfeld, and his clean singing is just beautiful and complements their music really well. So no shade towards Opeth, but I thought it's an interesting way to describe what you might expect from this album is an Opeth style vibe, but done without the growling vocals perhaps. But for a debut record, this is just a stellar album. It's impressive that it sounds this polished and this well crafted for such a young group of musicians who are just freshly forming this type of music. It's just really cool. And what I like about it, aside from my Opeth comparison, what I think is really cool about them is that they take this heavier, more extreme progressive metal, but infuse different prog rock elements that keep it more varied and interesting. It doesn't overwhelm you with all these blast beats and heaviness. You know, you get some cool jazzy moments here and there. You get some really cool prog keyboards done by Andy Tillison. There's flute work, there's sax and clarinet that really round out the sound and give you a lot of different things to grab hold of and to really catch your ear. So it's a really varied record. It mainly stays in that Opeth style heavy extreme metal lane, but has enough of these various sections to keep you entertained and keep a little bit of variety into the mix. So it opens with an Office 4, which is a bit of a shorter introduction track. Begins with a burst of energy, then some bluesy guitar playing, and finally some tasty vocal harmonies, closing with some saxophone in the background with those vocal harmonies playing out. A short intro, but it really gives you an impression of what this band's about. It has a little piece of the heavier nature, you get a bit of that vocal harmony type style, and you get some bluesy guitars and a saxophone. It's a really cool little track leading into A Dead Man, which comes into more power with some furious blast beats before you get a groove-based laid-back Opeth-style vibe with great vocal harmonies. Get a bit of a flute section halfway through, adding a jazzy component on top of all the heaviness. almost reminds me of some of the heavier moments maybe of some Steven Wilson solo projects. Then it erupts into an amazing organ solo and a guitar break and really cool instrumental section to close out the piece. And they do this in a lot of the tracks. They have these really great soloing sections that have some solo spots for keyboards, and then it moves into some solo guitar work. And the guitarist is just fantastic. There's so many great guitar moments and solos that it just really drives this home and just really creates for a great listen through. Until the Sun Illuminates is another heavy opening with furious drumming and heavy riffs. Develops with some great proggy keys and some strong metal riffs. Some gruffer vocals in parts here. There's fantastic keyboard solo halfway through, full of atmosphere and prog vibes, leading into a monster guitar solo with a heavier bent. As we get out of the solo section, there's some great vocals and wonderful saxophone adding texture and some brooding mellotron. Just a really cool piece. And throughout the album, I'll be talking about these more gruffer vocals. Like I said, they don't really go into the Cookie Monster, screamo, growling vocals, but I feel like they do add a bit of grit and add a bit of this kind of grittier, harder-edged vocals at times. But at other times, it's more melodious and more with these like sparkling vocal harmonies and things. So you get a balance of these different types of vocal stylings, which I think really adds another element to this album. Really interesting and really intricate. Someone listening has a good chugging heavy feel with some grit in the vocals, balanced by lighter Opeth-inspired cleaner guitar moments. Halfway through we get another atmospheric section with beautiful vocal harmonies and light sax in the background. The vocal harmonies were almost making me think of Yes in parts, but it's just an incredible vibe, great atmosphere, great sax solo, leading into a cool anthemic guitar soloing section. Just a real highlight of the album, a great track. Forsaken is another awesome track with some jazzy saxophone before it goes atmospheric with a thoughtful vocal. Then we get into some heavier Opeth-style metal riffing and grittier vocals, but I like the little sax breaks throughout the piece that add this jazzy kind of film noir kind of vibe that's really fascinating and blends it really well with some of the heavier blast beat type sections. Just really cool. That leads to some really great proggy keyboard soloing, some more jazzy sax sections, and then a hypnotic style trance ending that leads to a fascinating climax. So a really fantastic track that leads to Buried, which starts with some bluesy guitar licks, some really tasty vocal harmonies. This is a heavier track overall, but it has some really interesting, cool vocal hooks that keep me coming back to it. It's a really interesting, cool, shorter track on the album that I think is really well placed to balance out all these longer-ish pieces that have a lot going on in them. All Turns to Clay begins with a burst of cool proggy keys over riffs. You get some added sax and those grittier vocals once again. Really fascinating proggy opening full of dark atmosphere before we're led into a really brilliant metal riff, taking us into a more traditional metal sounding section with gruffer vocals. This is one of the heavier tracks, but once again, still introduces some lighter sections, some proggy keys, and all of these different elements to add more variety to the mix. Unafraid is another great driving prog metal track with great grooves and vocals. There's another great jazzy instrumental interlude with great flute work halfway through. That's one of my favorite sections instrumentally on the record. Just really leans into this jazzier element that's really fascinating. And Stay ends the album on more of a big, expansive ballad with some keys and atmospherics, beautiful vocals, great layers and vocal harmonies, great epic soaring guitar solo, leading to a great organ solo as well. And it just is a really epic conclusion to what's been a fantastic album. So really great album for those fans of the more heavier end of the prog metal spectrum, but liking a bit of variety with some cool prog rock moments. I think adding Andy Tillison on keyboards here was a really expert move because he adds that proggy credibility and adds a different element that's unlike a lot of other prog metal bands. I think the addition also of flute and clarinet and saxophone adds another element and layer also to this piece. And so it just is growing on me more and more the more I listen to it. You know, when I first heard it, I was pretty blown away by the sound of it. But it just becomes better and better upon repeated listens, and I start to hear the little nuances and the little fun elements of the different tracks. And it's just a really cool album that I want to recommend to you all, especially if you like Opeth. but maybe aren't so into the heavy growling vocals, this could be a good middle ground and add some proggy flair that I think could add general appeal to just the prog rock audience at large. So thank you guys for joining me on this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the review. I enjoyed talking about this one. It's one of my favorites of the year and just keeps climbing up and up the charts of one of my favorite records. So thank you guys, and I hope you'll check it out, and I hope I'll see you in a future episode on the channel. So thank you once again, and for now, keep enjoying the music. Bye everybody!